People from the Mexico City Electoral Institute Observers Network. I'm so sorry for not welcoming you this morning. We saw you, but we are always used to saying foreign because the forum is normally like that. But we would like to thank also the presence of Mexican observers joining us today. And we would like to invite you to join us during the rest of the forum. We would like to welcome you. This is session 4 that corresponds to elements of equity during elections. What do we do at institutional levels in order to obtain tools that generate equity and equality during elections? We'd like to welcome Carla Astrid Confrit Jordan, Counselor of the National Electoral Institute. Welcome, Madam Counselor. Counselor Carolina del Ángel from the National Institute of, from the Electoral Institute of Mexico City. Welcome, Madam Counselor. And Councillor Uquibe Espadas and Councillor Jorge Montaño, both electoral councillors of the Electoral National Institute. Thank you for being with us today. I know these are you have very tight agendas. We know that this is the closure of the electoral agenda and you have a lot of work, so thank you so much. We are going to change the order and we are going to start with the first topic of this table, which is debate. And we would like to ask Carla Humphrey to share some opening remarks for 10 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We would like to welcome you. I know that this is the fourth table. We were also with you during this morning, but we were not able to have a conversation with you. So welcome, everyone. It is a pleasure to have you with us today. This morning, the presidents of the tribunal, as well as the INE, shared important data that make these elections unique, as well due to the more than 20,000 positions that will be competing, as well as all of the states involved and the anticipated voting, the vote on remand, and besides the 5 affirmative actions at a federal level and the different variants of these affirmative actions, the consecutive re-election at the Senate, which is the first time that's happening, the second one at the lower chamber of representatives, and the voters will face a booth with 4 to 6 elections ballots, plus, depending the state where they are, if there are elections for governor, there are 9 elections for governors, and the mayorship of Mexico City. That's also analyzed by the Electoral Institute of Mexico City. We also have 19.4 million voters registered in the voters list. 26% are young people, and what I will be talking about is how we convey information to the citizens so that they can issue an informed and reasoned vote. And we have different paths to do so, along with the administrative authority, INE, and the electoral institutes of the different states. Political parties feed a system that's harboring the institutional webpage of the INE, which is called Candidates, Get to Know Them. And we have first the trajectory and the profile of each of them if they are postulating due to any affirmative action, what are their proposals, which is very important that during this electoral silence is exactly the time where they will receive more visits, where this website will receive more visits to be informed of the candidates and how to vote on Sunday. And another path is the organization of debates in the electoral field, and this is where we provide guidelines so that debates are organized. But this happens because there is a request from those that are contending in this elections so that the debates can be organized. And of course, there are for federal positions, but they are organized in each of the different states. Now, about presidential debates, we've been organizing debates for 30 years at a national level. 30 years ago, we had the first presidential debate in Mexico. That used to be agreed among the candidates with no regulatory framework. There was nothing based on which we could organize these electoral processes, and it is important to add this because the INE, as the guiding lead of this organization that was created 10 years ago, was also created as an obligation in order to organize at least 2 presidential debates, and the candidates also for them to attend to 2 debates mandatorily, and they are also to be mandatorily broadcasted for a network that Dr. Espadas will be sharing with us. He will be discussing a political communication model quite complex, through which the parties and the candidates cannot buy directly spaces in TV or in radio. So TV chains that have coverage in more than 70% of the country have to mandatorily broadcast these debates. What have we done for this electoral process? Well, as INE, we've been operating for 10 years. This is the second presidential debate that has been organized with these very simple rules. And fortunately, there is an elections regulation that standardizes different steps that have to be followed to organize debates. One is a temporary debate commission that I was in charge of presiding, and also Councilor Montaño was a member of it. And we have to approve different stages and different agreements, some basic rules to organize debates, formats in order to hold them, and a series of aspects that have to be discussed in advance, which is when we receive the registration of the candidates for the presidency. So it is some time when we start working without candidates, so we don't know how many presidential candidates there will be at the end of the day, but we have to start making decisions about formats, basic critical rules, approving them at the General Council, and this helps provide transparency and certainty to each of the stages that are addressed. So first of all, the commission is created, then the stage of pre-campaign starts simultaneously, and when it comes to having the points of views and all of the candidates already registered, and this happened on February 29th this year, which meant that as of March 5th, as we start sessioning with the representatives table. That's how we call it in the manual. They are direct representatives of presidential candidates, and they are the ones that make decisions about different aspects or format aspects on how they are going to debate, but also technical logistics and production aspects. This is something that may sound complicated. And yes, it is complex to organize these tables because they consider what should be the camera shot, at what height should the podium be, what is the distance that should exist between one candidate or the other, and what is the background that they want, if they will move and if they will distract the audience or not, if it is going to be televised and broadcasted that should invite people, or there's always tension between what has to be favored. An agile, dynamic debate where candidates can face each other, or the representatives just go there and look after their candidates. They look after them not being attacked, not being exposed. So there's this tension between an institutional commitment of providing information so the citizens can see the candidates the way they are, listen to their proposals, listen to who they are, and of course tension with representatives because they are worried that they won't be exposed, the candidacies won't be affected. Fortunately, Councilor Carolina del Ángel will let us know because at a federal level there is an obligation to hold these debates, and candidates have to attend. As I said before, it is an obligation. There's an obligation to organize 2 debates only. We decided to have 3 of them, as it happened in 2018, 3 presidential debates, and we also decided that the 3 of them were to be mandatory for candidates. By law, according to the law, they just had to attend to 2 of them, but we made it mandatory for the 3 of them. 2 female candidates, 1 male candidate attended to the 3 presidential debates. In 2018, debates were 1 in Mexico City and 2 in different states of the country. We also decided to have the 3 of them in Mexico City. 1 for the first time at the central headquarters of the National Electoral Institute, and other 2 were in Estudios Churubusco, were held in Estudios Churubusco, and the third one is in a benchmark and emblematic place, which is the University Cultural Center at Tlatelolco, and there were many dynamics. Yesterday we submitted the final report of the second and third debate, and I think that what we can provide as an input is that the topics that I will mention later on, the topics in the first debate was education and health, transparency and fighting against corruption, non-discriminating vulnerable groups, and violence against women. In the second debate, it was economic growth, employment and inflation, and infrastructure and development, poverty and the inequality, climate change, and sustainable development. And for the third and last debate that was held on Sunday, May 19, the subjects were social, political, domestic politics, exterior politics, democracy. So what were the central decisions that we faced? One, that there could be an idea sharing, a debate where we could see and listen to the candidates. So here we established a format with a special time allocated that was free to be used by the candidates, so that raising their hands could be given the floor. Something that we faced during the first debates is what happens if candidates do not want to speak, if they don't want to speak, they don't want to raise their voices. How to start the conversation? What is the role that moderators should have? We didn't want for it to just be speaking clocks that would say, okay, you're up and that's it. We wanted for them to be able to dialogue, to trigger questions. So the question here was by the representatives of candidates. We don't want for them to ask questions. We don't want for them to interrupt us. We don't want for them to go beyond saying that we are not participating, or maybe asking a generic question, not a specific question, not one that's going to get us in trouble. So all of the role between limiting the role of moderators and expanding the possibility of taking full advantage of having the candidates for the first time in one same forum, debating and proposing. So I think that the experience is quite enriching. These are very important democratic exercises. Exercises that allow us to know who the candidates are. But I think we have to keep developing formats and design. The design with this tension between people that are looking after their candidates and we that want to expand formats so that the citizenship can have a very clear picture of who the candidates are, what their proposals are, how they react before questions from other candidates, because this, of course, causes complex reactions. So I think it will be clearer if it's stated that the electoral institution is the one that's going to decide what rules of the game we're going to have. We had 3 different formats for each of the debates. For the last one, there was a cross question among the different candidates that, as a request of the candidates, instead of being in person, asked in person, it was written. So the moderators chose the questions of each of the candidates so that they would be read if they were for them, but not in person, which I think took away a little bit of freshness, let's say. It didn't sound that alive. And in the second debate, we had the presence of the citizens. Through media, we received 25,000 questions, and through transparency processes, the questions that were to be asked during this first debate were chosen, and the second one was with questions that we went out and looked for the citizens throughout the 32 states to ask for questions that we video recorders, and there were citizens from 6 years old above that wanted to ask questions, and they were from 2 different states and also 2 cities in the U.S., Los Angeles and Dallas. Why those 2? Because these are the 2 cities where we have the biggest list of voters abroad. So we wanted to give voice to the foreigners that can vote. So I think we are on the right way to change from the previous designs of debates that used to be only answering a question and maybe challenge the question of the other candidate. So this allowed, of course, to release a little bit more tension so that the candidates' representatives are the ones that can decide, or will not really decide, but understand and make decisions when taking, and you can see this with a shot, and of course there were several decisions that have to be made, very technical aspects like the position of the podium and the distance among candidates. So I think that this freedom will help the citizens to receive more information on about who these candidates are and what are their proposals. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Councillor Carla Humphrey. I would like to pass the floor, continuing with this same idea of debates, but now we are going to ask, what does it mean organizing debates for local elections? And we would like to pass the floor to Carolina del Ángel, Electoral Councilor of Mexico City. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us today, observing such an important and big elections, because this gives us strength and this makes credibility even more legitimate. So, as Councillor Humphreys was saying, it is mandatory by the electoral authorities to organize debates. However, it is important to add that with this, as with many other things, the federal legislation states that they shall be carried out according to standard regulations. So we find a huge difference between federal and local regulations in the case of Mexico City. In Mexico City, for example, debates are not obligatory, which causes a problem, so that candidates can talk to people. And in our case, we need to have 3 debates for the Mexico City mayor and also for each of the popular vote for the positions that are only chosen by popular vote. We also need to include all of the migrant representation that will be voted. So in total, we organized more than 60 debates. If it's not enough, it was 54 of them mandatory and 6 more due to any other reason. So it's important to add that the Constitution states, the Constitution of Mexico City states that there has to be 3 debates per each of the positions that will be elected. So we're talking about more than 150 debates. But when translating this to the Elections Commission, it only refers to 1 for each and 3 for the Mexico City mayorship. So that's why we had 3 of them, under the premise that the Constitution should be above a law that the Constitution didn't respect this time. So what we generated at the debate commission were the conditions, the right conditions, so that each district headquarters in each district council, the conditions were generated in order to carry out other debates besides the 54 that the law mandated. Not everyone wanted to do so, not everyone organized them. Actually, out of the ones that the law states as legal, not mandatory, they were not held because candidates decided that they didn't want to debate. So, facing the impossibility of forcing them, we had some debates, many of them. There was one political force that didn't attend. And also, there was further development in human rights. We have a political constitution that's quite developed and guarantees human rights of priority groups that are historically forgotten or that have been left behind. We organized a debate for people on remand because I don't know if you have already been told or if you will be told, this is the first time in this country that mandatorily at a national level, we have to organize the elections so that people on remand can exercise their right to vote. However, it is really hard to have an informed vote condition with people on remand. So what we're aiming for at the local elections to bring all of broadcast live inside the remand division all of the debates for president, for city councilship, for mayorship. According to the regulations approved by the INE, that's the place where they will have to exercise their right to a vote inside the remand space. So another element that we had in terms of inclusion is not only the debates at a mayorship level and city councils, the minors were also included. They participated answering one question. It was hard to get consensus because in Mexico City, the law forces us for all of this design of the debates to be approved by political parties with the mediation of the Electoral Institute. This puts us in a very complicated situation because, for starters, we cannot start the organization of the debates if there are no candidates, yes, because we need to have consensus. So this creates a dynamic where we have to be running around during the last days where we already have the registration of the candidates. And as of there, we have to generate the right conditions so that every political party can accept aspects such as the ones Councillor Humphrey already mentioned, which is a little bit complicated because there are no previous documents as of which we can tell you, okay, this has already been approved by the Electoral Authority and this one not yet. This is the minimum base and the minimum base has to be built with them. There was a lot of resistance to the participation of children. And it's important to say they didn't want to. We put it on the representations one because that's where we have a little bit more flexibility in order to do the standard from the Commission and to go to the concentrated bodies. But it was not the case of the Mexico City mayorship. There was a lot of convincing that had to be done, and with this, we were able to get the participation of children during the third debate. Questions asked by boys, girls, and adolescents out of the political participation observation of adolescents that belongs to the INE and that have a work, which is a preparation work or job. But the questions that you can see in any mayorship debate, and the third one for the Mexico City mayor, it was questions thought for them, how they perceived the city from their very particular perspective and standpoint. And the only thing that the parties asked of us was for the question not to seem to be directed or targeting a certain candidate, and not showing that something was missing in the city or maybe praising the achievement of a government. Those complications, well, that's what we find very hard to obtain in those situations. Now, Mexican Sign Language, which is mandatory in every broadcast for us that are the broadcasters, and I want to tell that we gave one step forward. What we saw in the first presidential debate, there is a special broadcast in different channels for people with hearing impairment, where the image of the debate is smaller and the image of interpreters is prioritized. That's how we did it for the second and the third debate, and we would also like to add that we would have loved to do it in every debate, but due to budget that the Institute has, well, we are not seeing the best years, not even because it is a processoral time. So In all of the debates, we attempt to broadcast it, but for the special ones, we only do it in the two latter ones. And now, seeing the call of one of seeing impaired persons in the third debate, we asked the moderators and the candidates to please briefly describe who they are and how they look like, so that people with vision impairment could know what they looked like. We had people with voters' ID that were homeless and that were present, and we tried to include all of the groups in the last debates. We invited also voters so they could live the experience for the first time with people that they felt comfortable with because of an age situation, because of the age group. So we were looking for inclusion as well. And I would like to conclude this idea by saying that today debates have turned into a TV event. There comes a time where it appears that there is confusion. Actually, I was talking to Councillor Humphrey in the debate on in prison, when we were like, we are not really recording a TV show, we are recording a debate, because that one in prison was recorded to be able to broadcast it later, because that's the simplest, easiest way to reach the citizens. The law says that we have to reach everyone, and the easiest way to do so is through TV. The INE is the only authority at a national level that could hire TV and radio airtime. Because the local public bodies cannot do it. What we do is put at the consideration of all of the media signal, and this allows us to adjust to what a producing house is. And we can impact the logistics, the production logistics of a studio. That's what they do, but with the electoral standard. But that becomes a huge chaos, because TV companies won't stop seeing it as a TV event, and electoral authorities can't stop looking at it as a campaign event. So I do believe that there is still a situation where we have still adjustments to make. It is still hard to match the fact that a TV production will close its scenario at some point. And if you don't tell the candidacies that it's going to be closed, then they could be arguing a violation to their right, to their campaign right, to their expression. There are thousand situations that we have to be very careful of when we prepare the regulatory documents of these debates. So that's all I want to share with you. I don't really want to elaborate much further, and I would like to invite you, if you would like to look at the debates, the 60 debates that were organized in less than 3 months by these institutes, and they are in YouTube of the Mexico City Electoral Institute. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Councillor. We would like to thank you for sharing a very general overview, a brief overview of what's going on at a local and state level and federal level. It is very important because this has been critical in order to be able to inform the citizens and to promote an informed vote. So this is one of the important elements to promote equity in our country's elections. Thank you very much, both of you. And I would like to continue with Councillor Angeles that interconnected this with the debates, because the next one it would be with Councillor Espadas with the term of radio and TV times and other prerogatives. So, Councillor, please go ahead. The floor is all yours. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you, and I would like to thank you for being with us today in our country. You you comply with a very important mission, helping us achieve democracy in our electoral processes. It hasn't been easy. It wasn't easy to achieve the presence of international observers in Mexico. There was a lot of resistance, reluctance during the regime of the current political party that argued that that was to be foreign influence. But what they really didn't want is that people abroad would see the grotesque frauds that in a remote, in a very nearby past used to happen. So technically today, it's not technically foreign observers, but foreign visitors. However, we know that you are observers. That's the function that you meet. And fortunately, Mexico doesn't have, as a general rule, this prejudice of false nationalisms, because the things that we Mexicans do, no one can observe them. I mean, it can be observed, you do observe them, and you help us a lot with a comprehensive electoral processes, honest ones. And the prerogatives that political parties have today come from this same past. And most of the things that we have in the law today about the conditions of these prerogatives are also determined by this past, a unique hegemonic political party where elections were just formal processes. Let me take some time to briefly sum up how things were in practice before 1991, especially before 1997. Political parties formally existed as of an electoral amendment in 1977, where the spectrum of opposing political parties increased. There was a list of 4 political parties. It was a stable list. Only one of them was of the opposition. And there was a number of 7 political parties just out of nowhere overnight, so that the Mexican state was able to include within the electoral system political forces of big relevance, of large relevance, that were not included. However, being included in the system didn't mean that they would compete under equal situations. The general use was the systematic extraction of resources, public resources, to use them as a benefit of the state party. I am certain that no other country in Latin America normally takes money from the public for electoral campaigns. But well, we did have a very serious problem with that, and political parties would compete, yes, but in very unequal situations. In terms of dissemination, there were 2 important national TV broadcasters. One was a chain by the government, another one promoted by the government, but that was private. The 2 of them would give exactly the same airtime to electoral processes, where the set of information and the comments that would focus on promoting the candidacy of the official party provided very small time to the opposing candidates. And definitely, this was including also very differentiated grade scores between official candidates and the opposing candidates. This generated 2 important claims from the opposition in time. On one hand, preventing illegal access to public resources by the party in government. That was only one, and simultaneously to allow access at some level of public funding to the opposing parties. The other huge claim had to do with the TV coverage, although radio was also included. So let's go back to these times, please. We are talking about just the beginning of Internet, the prehistoric times of Internet. So most of Mexicans would consume information, would look at information through TV, but these 2 main TV broadcasters would cover the biggest amount of the spectrum. There were small local stations that had their thing, but at the end of the day, people would be informed as of what this double group instead of monopoly, duopoly, because on one hand there was a claim to have access to TV and radio through official times allocated by the state that haven't always existed. However, they've existed for a long time already in communication media, and that the media not to act as legal advertisers for the different political parties. So two elements were approved. One was broadcasting, and the other one was approving, assessing that broadcasting. And that procedure continues until today. Now, currently, out of the for the entire country and for all of public and private concessionaires where, yes, it's true that the institute but no electoral body is authorized to convey balanced information by all of the political parties. But the institution does make sure that this actually happens. Now, there is a funding for political parties that's calculated on the basis of the number of persons that are enrolled in the electoral roster, the electoral list, for a fixed amount. In this case, it's 65% of the daily amount of the current unit measurement. So it's called UMA in short. It is a unit, and its actual value is sustained at a fixed price. So they do, the weight of the international market cannot be adhered to, nor any other measure that were minimum wages, for example. The UMA value is around 11 pesos, which means 60-something cents of a dollar. So the money available for all of the political parties every year is kind of something like 60-something cents of a dollar multiplied by the total number of members in the list. So for the process 2024, this amount added 10,300 million pesos, that are like $630,000 million, more or less, that were distributed among the political parties that are registered. Now, careful here. One of the things that Mexico has sustained since the remote past is a political party system that's kind of closed. Currently, only 7 parties have a registration. They have a state's approval, authorization to be able to compete in national elections. These 7 parties are the ones that currently have access to these prerogatives. Now, the general money package is divided into 2 big segments. 30% of this funding money is distributed in an even way, and the 70% remaining is distributed proportionally to the vote obtained by each party when voting for Congress, for representatives of Congress. So in electoral years, every 3 years, this goes up 30% when it is only for legislative elections. This is every 3rd year. So in this case, in 2021, we had only legislative elections at a national level, and political parties received, besides the ordinary amount, they also received an extraordinary amount for campaigns that's equal to 30% of the previous one. For presidential campaigns, such as the 2024, where Congress members are also going to be elected, this amount goes up to 50%. This is a relatively high funding compared to what had existed before, and in relation with what political parties could spend. And yes, this is a number that not only catches our attention, but this is subject of political debates all the time. So the idea of this increased public funding across, along with private funding obstacles that I won't have time to elaborate on, and the auditing system that's more and more strict every time, they had the attempt to, on one hand, prevent, stop the illegal use of public resources, and simultaneously prevent the incentivize the usage of private incentives to these electoral processes, but above all, guaranteeing what opposition political parties had a minimum amount of money so they could reasonably compete in electoral campaigns with them. This is a very difficult way to sum up, but well, the first goal was reached but poorly, and the second one was reached successfully. So today we have to deal with the illegal income or entry of resources or that are not detected, but we can detect them through a sophisticated, comprehensive auditing system. But we have to admit that there are situations where this money is materially important to impossible to detect, not only by electoral authorities but also by fiscal, by auditing authorities. The second aspect has worked very well. In situations of inequality, political parties of the opposition. There could be political parties that are just creating or permanent ones depending on where they are. Even if there are minority political parties, they won't be overwhelmed by an election, so they have the possibility to introduce candidates and proposals, and at some point to also affect candidates of the other campaigns, which is part of what happens in any political campaign. Although Mexico's laws are restrictive in terms of parties and candidates having to say very ugly things during electoral campaigns. Very well. The other important aspect, one about access to radio and TV, means that all of the political parties vary. And let me go faster because this is quite complex and long and we have other things to consider. But for them to be able to consider, again, a division that's similar to money with a package of air, which is 30% divided equal and 70% divided in proportion with the votes that each party has received. This is translated in radio and TV spots that are broadcasted every day, which means now during this campaign period that the INE distributes 48 minutes a day per each concession station, whether it's private or public or social concessionary sessions. The social ones are the ones that are interrelated to these different type of communities, but mainly indigenous communities. The institute then acts not only as a person that distributes time, but it's also in charge of collecting the material that's used, providing them to the broadcasters, and to surveil the strict compliance of the broadcasting guides that INE itself has defined. In Mexico, it is illegal to acquire for anyone to acquire, whether individually or through a company, whether public or private, to buy radio or TV airtime in order to disseminate advertising of political parties. That has a very direct background in the presidential campaign of 2006, where business corporations gave huge amounts of money in order to buy advertisement against one of the competitors. We have an infrastructure through which we are able to verify that political parties' spots are broadcasted timely and properly. And this has actually been a win for plurality and democracy that allows for all of the political parties to have access to these broadcastings. And it is also an object of multiple debates because a non-restricted number of people complain that the advertising mass of the parties tend to be a little bit upsetting at this time. I disagree. I do believe that advertising in itself has to be part of the democratic process. And also something else is that some political parties, one thing is to have very poor advertising online, but well, there it is. It's very freedom of expression oriented, so we're not authorized to censor. The other two aspects that are used, they are very minor in terms of their effect, is a telegraph franchise, the use of telegraphs, which is public in Mexico, and the use of the certified mail. The postal franchise has been one that has not been used as much in the later elections. However, this is quite funny, and with this I would conclude my intervention. In this process, this has acquired relevance again. They started circulating videos where there are male persons going door to door to deliver political parties advertising, or some not very well informed leaders of other political parties went out on the street and said, "Oh my God, the postal service is at the service of a political party." And the answer of Mexican Postal Service, EPOMEX, as well as the INE, was like, well, no. They have a franchise of 35 million pesos a month, a franchise that they are using in order to distribute their own propaganda. Other parties have decided not to use it, so that's that. That's the decision of each of the parties. I suspect that after this micro scandal, some political parties would attempt to use their franchise, but we don't have any specific information. So for now, it's only speculation. I will conclude by saying, in Mexico, electoral processes that are expensive, so to speak. But this cost has showed that it is quite minor compared to the huge costs that the country was going through as of brutally inequitative elections, generating movements of resistance and reluctance. A country where the concentration of information and money was only lying on one state's party, and it has able to generate competitive elections, which means that the democratic development problems, are they solved now? No, not at all. There's still a lot to do. There are new borders to cross, but definitely the old inequalities and inequities of the political system have been, in a very significant measure, overcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Councillor Uki Espadas. And to close the presentations of this table, to which we have called Elements for Equity in this competition, we give the floor to Jorge Montaños. He will be talking to what we must expect affect all of this, the control of the political parties' use, the auditing systems, and that area of auditing of the institution controls that they have been well used corresponding to the intention. Well, first of all, thank you so much. Quite thankful that you have organized this such an important event. I want to welcome you, and first of all, I want to clarify something. I have had the opportunity of having the kindness and generosity of our hosts, my friends, of observers coming from abroad and from Mexico as well. I have friends, men and women, with whom I have had the opportunity of carrying out exactly that activity. In here in Mexico, we call it foreign visitors. But outside, abroad, we are called international observers. When the time allows us and previous an invitation, we will be able to be with you. This topic is very important, and I am very happy to be sharing with you today, and I hope that our hosting capabilities is equal to those that we have received when visiting your countries. Now I'm talking about auditing, and I'm going to be talking about the geographic context of our country. We have a polycultural Mexico. To the north, we have the United States. To the south, Guatemala and Belize. We have something very different cultural-wise, economic-wise, and obviously political-wise. Mexico is around 1,950,000 square kilometers, 32 states that in other countries are called departments, 2,440 municipalities. Other countries call them provinces or townships. I'm trying to be as specific as I can, but you see the size, which is huge. So how can we control and audit all of this, talking on elections, and particularly election auditing systems? Obviously, our behavior is very specific, and INE has 300 federal institutions that are distributed in all our territory. In of those boards has an office that is called Auditing Liaison. That is to say, those 32 liaisons will be working in coordination. They will be providing information to the Technical Auditing Directorate. Very important one, as the other directorates in the INE. But this one is in charge of auditing for independent nominated candidates and for the campaigns. I'm trying to be very practical here. There's a group in these liaisons. There are monitors, people that are hired. We do an interview. We look at their background, and then they are hired. We started a campaign on March, and then we conclude in May. We concluded it yesterday. To all those events, staff from the INE attended. They are monitors, and they are recording the political promotion of independents or political parties. What are the expenses in each of those events that promote those political parties or candidates? That is a plain view. And then we will be crossing all that information that is provided to us by the campaign responsible, will be crossed with that of the monitors to see if it matches. Because sometimes they are kind of tricky. They will say this bottle of water costs 10 Mexican pesos. But it turns out to be that this bottle of water is worth 20. Why are the coalitions, political parties, or independent candidates increasing the price? Because they don't want to overexpend. I occupy less, I expend less, and then the threshold that I have for expenditures, I will take longer time to reach. But the auditing service at the INE has a price matrix, and we know the price for each product countrywide. So you cannot trick the system. So go beyond your campaign threshold expenses, incurs in penalties. And there are other authorities that come to play a role as well. But the only authority that by the Constitution can monitor and audit in Mexico is the INE. Nobody else can do that auditing. The last reform, 2014, that the Mexican state has, that has been there for 10 years, gave the powers by Constitution to the INE. In the past, the provinces, the states, and the local electoral institutes were able to do those auditing. But now it is only the INE. Senate, presidential elections, but we also take care of deputyships and municipal presidents or mayorships, and also at a local level. Auditing is tied up to other electoral entities. Whichever the name is, the last name, the surname is Electoral. So auditing, in order to be done, first, the INE will receive the support by its own unit, by the monitors, and agreements that has signed with the authorities of the Mexican state and a private. Financial institution from the Credit and Treasury Department, we can sign an agreement with them as long as we receive in due time and form. Challenging Act says that at all times we can receive information, not in natural days, in all times. We have to go to the Treasury, to the tax authorities, so we can know the source of the resources that a campaign is receiving and where we have a doubt. We want to know if that legal income is clean or not, because it might come from illegal sources, and we want to know if it comes from illegal sources. We have agreement with the banking association in Mexico because we need to receive information from the banking institutions in our country. We, in the past, suffered because the banking institutions took too much time to give us that information. So if you don't tell the banks what time and what moment you need to receive that information, for them, they only do business days. So you need to tell them that you need the information in due time and form according to our times. So we have been moving forward pretty well. So, while auditing, we have those incomes coming from illegal sources. So we can start on administrative process because we are an administration. We organize elections and we audit them, and that's it. But in Mexico, unlike other countries, because I visited Panama once, and in Panama, the tribunal organizes election. The tribunal asks ID voting cards. In Panama, they depend from the tribunal. The tribunal organizes, electoral tribunal. They take care of electoral fraud and qualifies the election. Not here in Mexico. We have three powers. So we have a trilogy in electoral issues. We're going to talk about federal. We have INE, administrative institution that organizes and audits. The tribunal that does only judiciary. And the special unit for electoral crimes that does investigation and sanction all conducts that are considered as electoral violations or frauds. So, in April 23, we have this Electoral Crimes Act. So if there is illegality, then I have to start a process in the right unit. Maybe investigation of money coming from an illegal organization. That is criminal law. That is not administrative law. Do you agree? Well, how are things coming into play? Article 9, 7th paragraph of electoral violations supports auditing. It refers that all entities, political parties, independent nominees, if they don't deliver in due time and form their audit reports, they commit an electoral crime. And things change because we can only issue administrative sanctions, but criminal is different. And if there is a crime in election, then you can be at a criminal law. I will be referring now to the tribunal and the local tribunals that we have, because in the 32 different entities, we have the local electoral tribunals, but they have to have a technical report. 18th of July, they have to have those technical reports and be able to provide to the jurisdictional authorities that are the electoral tribunals those reports in order to dictate sentence if it applies when they go beyond their budget. Those individuals or candidate that goes beyond the campaign expenditures threshold can be void, and they will not be able to participate in the extraordinary election. And he will be held to administrative and criminal penalties as well. So we need to provide all these tribunals with this information, because in these local elections, maybe sometime will be telling us that they can challenge that election win because of going over their budget for expenditures. Penal electoral authorities can carry out investigations, but we as administrative are quite limited. But if we receive those reports, then we can see if that election can be void. So, how can we say if that campaign has gone beyond the authorized budget threshold? We have a responsibility to act upon that, and we must protect the right development of this electoral system. I am glad to see that you are here because that helps us with transparency. We're looking for transparency. Look at our ballot boxes. They are transparent. And well, I will just be some numbers. The number of persons that participated as independent candidates during pre-campaigns. I will be alluding them. 4,300 Mexican people, men and women, that participated as independent candidates. And did we audit them all? Yes, of course we did. All of them were audited. And we identified 7 persons did not presented pre-campaign expenditures report, administrative action, and informed the penal authority, electoral authority, so they can act upon that. According to the pre-campaign reports that we received, over 4,000 reports from the political parties. The ones I refer to, 4,200 for pre-campaign reports were received from political parties. And we audit everything, public and private resources, Mexican law. And I want to tell you that the legal system is quite broad, quite complete. I could even say that it has been subject of study by other nations. So, it's pointing out that the public resources must prevail over private resources. But if it's private, we also audit them. We audit private and public. Obviously, they have less expenditures when they are independent candidates than when they are supported by a political party. But we need to define how we will be auditing them. We have what we call pro rata. We have 3 candidates participating in one forum for a political party. We will be prorating that expense amongst those 3 candidates. It is quite accurate as system because one of our principles is that for all resolutions or determination, we must give certainty. Without certainty, we have nothing. If we have certainty of secrecy of the vote, if I have the certainty, then we go beyond the time allotted to media broadcasting, which you already heard from. The same way we are doing during auditing. And I say nothing new, right? These are difficult times we're living, so this is the auditing topic in very practical way. You can see the full detail in our website, but I think that this was very practical presentation. That's very important for me. On the other hand, we have gender-based violence. And then you will be telling me, what does that have to do with auditing? Of course it has to do with auditing. Political parties, within their prerogatives, with the public money that we allot them with, that public money, they have what we call the annual working plan. Annual working plan must specify that 3% of their resources that they receive is to promote political participation of women. And what does that have to do with auditing, you must be asking yourself? Well, we have to monitor, we have to audit that they have been using that 3%. I will be telling them, if they don't do it, we cannot allow them to simulate when it's talking about protecting the political rights of women, not only, and in this country, we audit that. If it's not applied, then they will be receiving sanctions. And if there are simulations, they will receive sanctions. And in order to identify those way of covering up their use, then we are supported by other institutions. And we want to comply in due time and form. In Mexico, we don't have the amparo recourse for election processes. Amparo is like habeas corpus. That's a protection. In criminal electoral law, it does apply, but in administrative law, it does not apply. That amparo recourse. Thank you, Councilor Montaño. We thank all 4 panel members and all of our attendees that have participated during this table. Because of our agenda, we have to close this table due time, because you know that we are short of time and a long agenda, so we have to concentrate on broad topics. And there are 2 questions, when if an action is legal or illegal. Tomorrow we will be answering them because we have a specific session talking about those topics. Legality and illegality, what you can do and what you cannot do. So we will be answering those questions tomorrow. Regarding the debates, we are being asked in order to provide information to the citizenry. The debate TV broadcast, since it's very brief to really present such a difficult and tough of subjects to the population at large. Is it really feasible? And the purposes of the debates, were they positive? The dynamic, the freshness of those persons that are in front of the cameras, that could be an element of value. So the question is, do you consider that that could be the reflection that will be anticipating how they will be managing the country? Or managing when in occupying their office? So how to improve the debates of our candidates in order to receive more information from them? And that we can get to know better their proposals and their personalities. We remind our audience that we are in electoral silence. There are topics that we cannot discuss because of Mexican norms. So our answers will be in a general sense. First of all, I want to start by the last part, how to improve the norm and that the nominees and the parties will not have a voice, and that it will be the citizenry that will build this norm because they are the ones that have to vote. So those candidates should be responding under all conditions. It is an event for the citizenry and not for the candidates. So I think that they should be presented to the citizenry in the same way that they are asking for their vote. Moderation? Well, I don't think that that will be different, because if not, I think that electoral authorities have been trying to control, and now it looks more like they were interviews and not debates. So we must emphasize they are debates and not interviews. So the political parties should have less involvement. Yes, if they are TV broadcasting. The second question was not very clear to me. I don't know. But TV, it's outreach. Internet does not reach everywhere. Sometimes over YouTube, but it is not viable for all the citizenry, for the population at large. So this would be an inclusion issue because we are aiming to reach the largest number of citizenry. TV is the best space to have that outreach, but it is very clear this is a campaign and not a TV show.
Thank you very much. I will combine prerogative and auditing because there are several questions that can be combined, and I'm going to try to do them per topic because we should have been closing already. So let's see how many of them can be answered. So a very specific question. Political parties have access to private funding sources, and if so, are there controls, and which are those? Another question is related to this, and it says, if expenses of the campaign done when making phone calls, for example, to the citizens, are those also audited, and how? And another related topic is, sorry, I'm just trying to group large topics, big topics, and it's hard. How do we check that private funding, if any, comes from legal sources? So we will need to have very specific answers. Please. Yes, go ahead. Yes, I will be very brief. Private funding is allowed from members of the political party or externals. Amounts are restricted, yes. I mean, the logic of the funding model is that the highest volume of funding is the one corresponding to public resources that, among other things, are the easier to surveil. I don't have the exact number right now, but as far as I remember, the personal donation could be around 1,800,000 pesos tops, which is kind of like around $100,000 approx. So, I mean, it is not a small amount for one person. However, for a campaign of the size of the campaigns that this country faces, these are controllable donations. But these donations, above all, have to publicly be declared. Who does the donations? And donations cannot be done to campaigns or candidates by companies or enterprises, no government agencies, of course, nor people or companies from abroad, foreigners. Thank you very much. Councilor Montaño, would you like to add anything, or should we continue? We continue. Okay. And there's another question. Yes, thank you. So we are asked, what happens with the resources that are not spent in political parties? And we are also asked, how is the prerogative considered, or how do you audit press conferences, for example, or participation in TV channels, or in some sort of broadcasting or dissemination that's done in the media by political players and actors, both in the elections and by public officials? That will be another important aspect. Thank you. Very briefly, media do a very important information task, and they help let the citizens know, in this case Mexicans, know, but not only Mexicans in Mexico, but also Mexican abroad, because there are media here, radio, internet, digital platforms, that also transcend our borders, because there are Mexicans overseas and they will vote in this electoral process. When these are invitations only, they do not generate any cost. There's no expense that's going to be charged to that candidacy. But the aim is that according to the Article 134 of the Political Constitution of the United Mexican States, there's something that's called elections equality. This means that if a company, so to speak, whatever means, invited one, they should privilege everyone. They cannot only invite one. They have to invite all of them in order to have equality. Unlike the states where they carry out the proselytist campaigns, if there is an event that's held in a public facility, whether a state or a municipality, there's no cost for the candidate, but the authority that is safekeeping that facility will have to give the same opportunity to the other candidates. There cannot be favoritism. This is because it won't generate any cost. But unlike if they do it in a private building, then it will generate a cost that's going to be updated. And of course, it will count for the campaign cost cap. If under the same conditions that this authority, I'm talking about a facility, a public facility, was lent to the candidate that requested it, then they will have to do the same thing with the other candidates. Oh, well, the facility has air conditioner, tables, and chairs. Well, yeah, but with the other one, it's going to be different. No chairs or no air conditioner. No, it cannot be. It has to be the same condition for everyone. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Espada, I don't know if you want to add anything. Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank our 4 presenters. We know that there are still some topics on the table, but I assure you that in the next tables we will have similar presentations that will be further focused on the questions that were pending. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. person to this fifth session, Electoral Justice in the Mexican Electoral Institution in the Forum for Foreign Visitors. I would like to warmly welcome the members of this panel. So I would like to welcome the Counselor of the National Electoral Institute, Beatriz Claudia Zavala Pérez, and Ernesto Bracamonte, Secretary Instructor of the Justice President of the Electoral Tribunal of the Judiciary. The goal of this session is to share with foreign visitors an overview of the Mexican electoral system. In this session, we will talk about the electoral process and the role of electoral bodies as guarantors of the protection of political and electoral rights of the citizens. Without any further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Beatriz Claudia Zavala Pérez, Electoral Counselor of the National Electoral Institute. Thank you very much, my dear Monica. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you. I'm very glad to be with you today. And it is very important for you to be able to rest from your travels. Hopefully it was the case. I hope that this day was a productive one and that this intervention can be of use to you and that I will be able to leave you important information, clear one. Thank you for being with Ernesto, and he is a dear friend of mine from a long time, and he works at an institution that I really respect and is really dear to me. So this topic that I will be talking about is the focus of electoral justice. But it is an equivalent element that we, as electoral authorities, are in charge of, especially those of us that work in the administrative section. Here, the INE and the local public bodies, the OPLES, are also involved in these efforts in each of the states, and it is the sanctioning regime institution in electoral matters from which several resolutions result. And under the light of our constitutional model and our legal model, many times they are questioned by the different involved parties, such as the media. So we have a system of restrictions that generate the activity of electoral authorities, and I will share with you how the sanctioning regime operates in electoral matters. Next, please. So the electoral sanctioning regime in electoral matters has as an end purpose to inhibit and prevent behaviors that could attack and affect the values, principles, and rules of our electoral system. So to this extent, it also has as an end purpose being able to restitute the legal order if this is attacked and affected. So we are talking about a regime that its end purpose is not sanctioning per se, but to approach the problems and to be able to prevent our complex electoral system to be attacked or violated. In these couple of days, you have been hearing about how our electoral system is composed, and you have been given written information that allows you to see that there is information on the rules and regulations for the use of radio and TV, for the campaigns, for the pre-campaigns. So all of these rules, in some way, when there is a complaint saying that they have been violated, then electoral institutions, the electoral authorities, are the first to get involved through this electoral sanctioning regime. How is this exercised, and what are the different paths? Okay, what are the different procedural paths through which this sanctioning regime the sanctioning regime exercises its authority? Well, we have several procedures. One of them is the auditing system that was the previous session. Here we have a specific model. However, we have a sanctioning special procedure. This one becomes very significant during the electoral process. The sanctioning ordinary procedure as well, and we also have another procedure to remove electoral counselors from local electoral institutes or public local bodies that the INE appoints, and in turn the legislator invests them with authority to be able to remove counselors when the serious causes were updated. I am going to, next please, I am going to first explain in all of this sanctioning procedure who could be sanctioned, who are the sanction subjects, who are the ones that we can sanction as electoral authorities. On one hand, we of course have political parties such as legal persons. We have the political groups that we always give them a registry as groups. We also have the catalog, the list of aspirants when they aspire to an independent candidacy, pre-candidates, candidates, independent candidates, popular election positions. They can also be subject to a sanction, to a penalty. Citizens and any physical or person or any company can be sanctioned. Electoral observers can also be sanctioned, or the electoral observing bodies, because they have obligations defined and they also have an established sanctioning regime that is updated if they break any electoral law. And we can also hear of matters that have to do with public officials of any of the different branches, federal, local, in any field, whether it's federal, state, or municipal. But here, the legislation does not grant power to electoral bodies of a direct sanction to public officials, but it states that public officials, once a violation of the law has been approved or confirmed, they go to the hierarchical one level up. So this is a very important topic in our electoral system because it has caused certain tension with respect to the citizens' perception and the status of the rules and regulations that we use to sanction public officials. Next one, please. It could also be public notaries, foreigners, because there is regulation and bans that interrelate us, but we can also sanction owners of radio and TV, unions. We can also do sanction religious ministers and representatives. So as you can see, the type of persons and institutions that can be sanctioned is quite wide because there are duties or prohibitions that, according to each of these subjects, are considered in our electoral constitution. Now I'm going to talk about what is the sanctioning procedure, the sanctioning special procedure, because this procedure becomes quite meaningful during an electoral process. Next, please. This procedure was created as of a sentence, a ruling by the tribunal, and afterwards it was turned into a law, into an act, because during 2006 at some point there was the need to address a complaint that the political forces submitted to the then Federal Electoral Institute that mentioned that there was a series of actions related to the coverage of the media with a slandering type of campaign that were leaving in a disadvantaged position one of the candidates. So at that time there was no sanctioning a special procedure. So what the Federal Electoral Institute at that time did was, okay, we will have time to investigate, well, first investigate and then solve. So the intent at that time was, The thing is that we need for this to be solved, because if this violation consummates in the damage, would be irreparable. So since this possibility was denied during a previous or precautionary measure, then it was sent to the tribunal. The tribunal said that there had to be a procedure that would be in charge of immediately addressing these complaints that were asked to be investigated in an expedite manner, so that they could be solved during the electoral process, so that it wouldn't generate any irreparable damages. So that's how the sanctioning special procedure was created. And it was created as a very short, very brief procedure. The legislation gives hours to be able to come out with a statement. For example, when a complaint is filed before the INE, then there are very few hours in order to be able to submit preliminary evidences and diligences. Once the unit has all of the initial data and there is a request for precautionary measures, then they are submitted before the commission, and we only have 24 hours to come up with an opinion or a ruling. So it is a procedure that's quite fast, quite expedite. It was conceived as so on purpose, and it also gave the parties a responsibility, which is submitting evidence. Because naturally, when we are talking about sanctioning procedures, the authority is the one that is in charge of investigating and collecting all of the evidence. But here in the legislation, we give them the task, the responsibility of presenting the burden of proof, so that the sanction can be appropriate. So look at what can be heard in this type of procedures. The possible violations of the rules and regulations. We have a certain time for pre-campaigns and campaigns to start. When there is an allegation that there are actions that anticipate to set specified times, then it is heard through this procedure. There is also a system of political communication, a model of political communication that you just saw in your previous session, that the Mexican state manages and the INE manages the times of the Mexican state, that are given to political parties so that they can generate their communication in radio and TV. And at the same time, they are forbidden to hire or to buy additional airtime for electoral and political matters. If there are possible violations to that communication model, then there is another procedure that we have to follow. Now, out of the content, what we know about political communication of the political parties has to do with slander. For example, when it is mentioned that there is slander, we have to also get involved, as well as when there are allegations of an unduly use of the federal spots, because there are federal spots for federal and local subject matters. When there is an alleged violation to these rules, this is the procedure that has to be followed as well. And this procedure also exists to hear of cases of possible violations to the rules that are given to public officials, that are neutrality duties, impartiality duties. Neutrality in the behavior. A public official in Mexico cannot interfere in electoral matters. It is forbidden from the exercise of the position that they hold in every level, federal, state, and municipal. And it also has the duty to apply the resources that has been assigned for the exercise of their position only for that, and not for electoral matters. So it is impartiality in the use of resources. It's also forbidden for a public official to use their position to promote themselves in a predominant manner, and especially if there is an intent to hold another popular election position, which would be a personalized or a customized promotion advertising by public officials. And in this procedure, if you see here, everything that has to do with the procedure matter is heard through this quick process. And this quick process in 2020 is also one that will allow us to hear about all of the behaviors that have to do with gender-based political violence. It is also a procedure that addresses topics so that possible violations are not completed, and there can be an electoral process where these potential violations can be addressed so that they are stopped, they are not consummated, and they don't have effects in the equity of the elections, or for it to be an electoral process that's free of violence. And there is another important aspect that's created from the Electoral Tribunal, which is protecting the best interest of minors. Why is this born? Well, because political parties, in their political communication, they use the image of many boys, girls, and teenagers, adolescents. And one statement that was formulated is that they needed to adhere to international standards to be able to use the image of children in political communication, because in some way they were interrelated with these ideologies of political parties. And that's how it was created. And today we have guidelines that demand to meet with certain rules, where it has to be clear that the minor has to authorize their appearance in the advertising spots. And they have had to be aware of the fact that they were going to appear at a national level, and also the parents' consent is needed. We have had some progress also with these guidelines. So as you can see, next please, as you can see, this is fundamental. All of these topics are fundamental when an electoral process is developed. Right now, for example, this procedure is where the two different authorities get involved, both the INE as an electoral administrative authority, as well as the tribunal, in order to solve all of these subject matters. So what is up to INE? INE investigates and develops all of the procedural actions that are going to allow the resolution of that claim or complaint that was submitted due to a possible violation of these rules. And what is the responsibility of the INE? Well, in a commission of complaints that's integrated by 3 counselors, we also solve the preventive protection, the precautionary protection, which is preliminary. And if there is any action that we consider that could be a violation, then we state an opinion where we order to stop carrying out certain actions so that the violence won't be consummated while the tribunal solves these matters. And once we conclude with this investigation, we send it to the tribunal through its specialized regional chamber. Our resolutions at the complaints commissions are solved by the higher chamber, as well as the challenges submitted against our opinions are going to be solved by the electoral tribunal. And well, I won't dwell in that because there's someone that will be talking about it. The resolutions that the regional, specialized regional chamber are issued are also going to be solved by the higher chamber if there is a challenge submitted. So I already told you about the complaint commission. It's asked to stop behaviors or protect from not being consummated in order to prevent a damage that could be irreparable. Now, look at what we have heard complaint-wise at different times. Next, please. So, in 2014, we were starting with this type of procedures. So only 90 matters had been solved. But in 2023, 1,377 matters related to this were solved. And in 2024, with a cut on May 24, we've had 936 matters that have been submitted before the INE, because we also have another aspect, which is what's done at the state level. So this is the procedure that we use the most in the electoral process. And next, please, to conclude, we also have another procedure that's called the sanctioning ordinary procedure. Everything that's not a matter for a special procedure, and that's also a violation to our law, falls in these procedures. So whatever is not reserved for the specialized sanctioning procedure, the removal of councillors and the auditing elements that you already heard of, we are going to solve them in the sanctioning ordinary procedure. So what have we heard of here? And this is very important as well. Next, please. Because in this type of procedures, we hear of situations when people state that they were unduly affiliated to a political party without their authorization, their approval. And in most of the cases that we have solved, yes, actually political parties didn't have a way to prove, they didn't have any evidence to prove that that person was a member, a part of that political party. So it was ordered to remove them from that roster, from that list, and the political parties were sanctioned because they acted against this affiliation right, the right of affiliation. But we have several behaviors that, for example, the INE, when they require, especially in terms of auditing, which is so quick, the law foresees that those that do not answer to the INE have to be sanctioned as well. And with this I conclude. So look here. In this ordinary sanctioning procedure, the INE does the investigation. The INE carries out all of the procedural activities, and it is the General Council, the one that's going to solve. It doesn't go to a tribunal. The opinion is issued here at the General Council of the INE. And then, look how the graph looks like. This is the graph that can help us understand how, next please, how many cases we've had up to March 24th. As you can see, these numbers are lower, they're smaller, fortunately, in this electoral process. What we don't want is to start procedures, because we will understand that no one is complaining that there is a possible violation to the law. The next procedure is the procedure for removal, and this is very interesting. With the amendment of 2014, we as INE and the General Council was given the authority to appoint electoral councillors that are in each of the states, in each of the electoral institutes. 32 OPLES, the public bodies. And these are the logos. So since they were given the authority to appoint, they were also given the authority to remove. Next one, please. Why could you be removed? Why can a public official or councillor be removed from a local public body? Well, if there is any of the serious causes that are established in the law, if they are violated. What are these severe or serious causes that could be violated? This is a very specific list given to us by the catalog. These are behaviors that attack impartiality, electoral impartiality, but there are also others that have to do with negligence. But these would risk the electoral function, as you can see, and as the law states and points out. We've heard of several cases, and we've also determined the removal of electoral councillors in some cases. In the list of cases, fortunately. The last procedure, and I will share this information with you, the last procedure is The auditing procedure. This procedure has to do with the verification of the origin, the amount, the usage, and the destination of the resources that's given to political parties, but it is also surveilled of those that come in, because there are subjects that I understand that you already saw it in the previous session. There are some of them that can provide to the political parties here in Mexico. Our auditing system, one of its guiding axes is to cover political parties with public funding that will be in its majority public funding, and prevent from receiving funding from private parties. It is forbidden from companies, foreigner companies, governors, of course, government agencies cannot give any money, of course. So all of this is heard by the auditing system. There is also an auditing commission, and at the end is going to be solved by the General Council. So in a very summarized way, this is the electoral sanctioning model. Everything that the General Council or the Commission solves is always going to have a filter, and the revision, of course, the review of the Electoral Tribunal. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Councillor Zavala, for your words. Now I would like to pass the floor to Ernesto Santana Bracamontes, Secretary Instructor of the Justice President of the Electoral Tribunal, and he will be talking about dispute resolution and means of challenge, or systems of challenge. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Monica, Claudia. I'm so glad to see you. Let me give you a very brief and warm welcome. Thank you for participating in this largest observation mission, more than 1,300 observers of different countries from around the world, which makes this election to be the most observed, and I think that this is going to give us a lot of strength to provide credibility and certainty to this electoral process. And I would like to apologize in advance, because what I'm going to share with you is, in general, what electoral justice is in Mexico. Fortunately, Councillor Claudia already shared a very thorough overview of everything that has to do with electoral justice or administrative processes that are held within the administrative authority, and in some cases where the National Electoral Institute worked together with the Electoral Tribunal. And I am going to refer to the Electoral Tribunal. So, as I was saying, I would like to apologize because it is going to be a very general overview. Then I'm going to start specifying. I will try to be brief, leave the basic information, and also have a time for a Q&A session, and maybe cover any questions that may be the result of my presentation. So, generally, the Electoral Tribunal of the Judiciary is very important to highlight it, because in Mexico we have an electoral justice that hasn't been functioning for long, 30, 40 years tops, when the authorities, not only administrative but also jurisdictional, started working together, and afterwards judicial and electoral. In the case of moving from elections rating activity through the political parties and through the chambers of the legislative branch, we transitioned to administrative tribunals, then jurisdictional tribunals, and after that the judicial branch. So today the political electoral matters are solved by one of the three branches that we have in Mexico, which is the judiciary. Okay, so we can say that today the political electoral matters are judicialized, and this is as of 1996. So I'm going to talk about that time on. So how is the electoral tribunal structured? It has a higher chamber that's integrated by 7 justices. It has 5 regional chambers distributed in 5 different divisions, each of them with a specific competition in terms of territory determined by the states that they are formed by and the elections that are organized in those territories. And it has a specialized chamber that Councillor Claudia Zavala already mentioned, which is a chamber that even though it's called regional, it is actually, it actually has the authority to operate in all of the country and everything that's special. The way this is formed, I think we all use the word complex for the Mexican electoral system because it is a complex system because of the way these competencies are distributed and authorities are distributed. At a national level, following this logic, the electoral authorities are jurisdictional. The electoral ones with 1 higher chamber, 5 regional chambers, but also at a state of national or provinces, because Mexico is divided in 32 territorial states. There is an administrative authority, electoral authority, and a jurisdictional electoral authority. What does this mean? Well, it means that the national model, where the National Electoral Institute and the Electoral Tribunal lie, is reproduced in each of these different territorial states with an administrative authority that organizes local elections and with a tribunal that solves the conflicts and disputes as a result of the elections. So this is with 2 different levels. But then I was also saying that these tribunals, these bodies, have very specific authorities and powers. For example, at a national level, as an electoral tribunal, the main function of the tribunal is to guarantee the political electoral rights of the citizens. And we have a very wide range because we could talk about political electoral rights of voting. So the tribunal guarantees the right of people to vote, also guarantees the right to be voted when they are candidates and acting as candidates. It guarantees the right of association or affiliation when a person attempts to become part of a political party. And this right of association is understood not only as belonging to a political party, but also participate in general in the life of that political party. For example, being part of the internal authorities of the political parties. So among other rights, for example, we also have the right to integrate electoral authorities. So Councillor Zavala within INE has procedures in order to appoint those that are councillors of the local public bodies, the OPLEs, where they have to participate through a procedure. And when they believe that they have been prevented from acting in those activities, they can also submit a challenge. And the electoral tribunal also becomes a guarantor of the right that people have to be part of the authorities of a political party. In general, all of this range of activities that Councillor Zavala was mentioning, she was saying that they can be challenged before the electoral tribunal. She was describing, for example, sanctioning ordinary procedures, and the opinions that are issued at the end are reviewed by the higher chamber in some cases, and others by regional chambers. In the case of, for example, sanctioning specialized procedures, she was telling that first they would go to the complaint commission of the INE, and they could be directly challenged before the higher chamber. And the procedures that reach the specialized chamber can also be challenged before the higher chamber, and this through a resource of review. So it's a really specialized situation, as the councillor was mentioning. Now, auditing procedures, for example, are also by the electoral tribunal. So virtually all of the procedures that are carried out at the National Electoral Institute can or could be verified by the Electoral Tribunal. In general, that's kind of the authority, the power that the Electoral Tribunal has, and I've had the opportunity to talk to some of you in smaller meetings, but I always like to add that the Electoral Tribunal today is a tribunal for human rights. Today it doesn't only guarantees from the standpoint of electoral political rights, the political participation as such, but also persons that belong to groups in vulnerable situations, groups that have been in disadvantaged positions or that have been historically discriminated, and today they are vindicated through affirmative actions, different measures, etc., so that in many cases these have been decisions that the INE states, and they are confirmed, ratified by the Electoral Tribunal. Today, by protecting the right to vote in elections, we can tell you that this right has been expanded, or it has established different aspects to it, because today Mexican migrants living abroad have the right to vote. And this is something relatively recent, new for us. And they have also been expanding options for vote, because we started with a postal vote, then electronic vote, and this has been developed in such a way that the exercise of rights of migrants has been progressive. In the case also, for example, of the electoral process of 2018, after 2018, it was determined that at the federal level, in federal elections, to allow people that are on remand, on pretrial detention, to issue a vote. So what does this mean? Well, these are persons that are arrested, that are deprived of their liberty, but that haven't been sentenced yet for a crime. So since they haven't been sentenced yet, their political electoral rights are still active, and they are just restricted materially. So what the tribunal did at that time was proposing to establish mechanisms through which the vote was guaranteed for federal elections. In this electoral process 2023-2024, the tribunal also decided to guarantee the right to vote for those that are on remand, but now also for local elections, for local state elections. And as I was telling you, this is the exercise of political electoral rights, so it has been evolving. So in the case of being voted from the electoral process of 2021, that's also going to be repeated in this process 2024, also the right to be voted is guaranteed. If you are a person in a vulnerable group, indigenous persons, Afro-Mexicans, people with disability, people from sexual diversity, and migrants. So, as you can see, today the Electoral Tribunal guarantees political electoral rights, but not only ordinarily, but also extraordinarily, if you will, for people that have historically been discriminated. And in all of this range of affirmative actions and guaranteeing political and electoral rights of people, we also find a cross-sectional element, which is parity. All of these affirmative actions should be guaranteed through parity as well. If there is an affirmative action to register indigenous people's candidacies, it has been stated that the quota has to be parity. If I remember, during this electoral process, we have 34 candidacies, but relative, majority, and proportional representation. So within these 34 candidacies, there will have to be 17 men and 17 women. So this is an element that I find cross-sectional and critical, and that participates in all of this range of affirmative actions. Another element that I see that due to parity has evolved and increased, and that's an important part within the tribunal, is to judge with the gender perspective, both in parity cases as well as in cases of gender-based political violence against women. In Mexico, it is defined as any violation to the women's rights just because they are women, if it has gender elements. Unlike violence, that's quite broad in other countries, in here is very specific. It has to be gender-based violence against women due to gender when the violation is done, for example, exclusively because it is a woman involved. And we've had very important progress in that field. Recently, the Electoral Tribunal participates through the Observatory of Equality of the Global Network on Electoral Justice, presided currently by the President of the President Justice Ali Soto. It has a guideline to judge with gender perspective, which is the first one in its kind. Evidently, there are other guidelines to judge with a gender perspective, but not in electoral-related matters. In this case, specific for electoral matters, and this is a very interesting document. Interesting because it is not mandatory. Its application is not mandatory, but I do believe it is a reference because it collects experiences both from national tribunals from Europe, Asia, as well as regional tribunals of human rights, such as the Inter-American Court, the European Tribunal, and this, of course, allows to pick up good practices that could be applicable in different countries, in different systems. And in this electoral process, what do we have? In this process, we have the elections that are also being rated by the tribunal. Through challenges, they will review approximately 20,500 positions in all of the country. So they are distributed at a federal level with a presidency, 128 senators, 500 representatives, and in the local field, at least we have 9 governors or 8 governors and 1 mayor, which is the mayor for Mexico City, virtual election of the 32 local congresses, and municipal positions. So in total is 20,500 positions approx. In statistic cases, in this electoral process, as of September 6 of last year, which is the date where the federal electoral process started, they have received 10,228 challenges, of a total that is forecasted 18,000 challenges that will be submitted throughout the electoral process. That's an estimate. Right now we've had 10,222. So what have been the specificities of this electoral process? I believe that I would focus virtually in 2 topics. One has to do, and it agrees with the statistic that Councillor Zavala was sharing, about the special sanctioning procedures. In the federal electoral process, especially in federal presidential elections, we are experiencing something that has been never heard of, which is that political parties, through, let's say, coalitions or fronts or identities among political parties, established a procedure in order to select positions that previously hadn't been done. And this, of course, caused an exposition by those that participated in these internal processes as a sort of anticipation to the electoral process. And I say it sort of because I'm not saying that what they did was illegal, but that it was unheard of. And at the end of the day, this determination, those internal processes that the political parties did were legal. They were confirmed by the Electoral Tribunal. For example, in one of the cases, the political parties met in order to choose a person that represented, so to speak, a political ideology that's identified with the current government. So political parties do this internal process in order to select the person that was going to provide continuity or that was going to defend the position of the government or of the ideology of the previous administration. So, on the other hand, the opposing political parties meet, and according to the law, they generate a procedure that's called an electoral front that's stated in the Mexican legislation in order to provide a political visibility. So let's say that they come together with the same ideology and they create a front. So let's say that what's curious here is that in each of these procedures, those that turn out to be elected in these internal processes are also those that also turn out to be candidates to the presidency, that at some point participated in an internal process, then they became pre-candidates in an internal process for the candidacy selection, and afterwards they became candidates. So let's say that through these three procedures, they've had some exposure before the citizens. And as I said, this is unheard of, it's something new, but I'm not saying it was bad. I'm just saying it's something that came up or happened in this process different, unlike previous processes. And as I was saying, I'm not saying it's illegal because the tribunal itself ended up confirming that these procedures by themselves were legal. And what had to be analyzed afterwards is if each action or act that the persons that participated in this procedure constituted a violation or not through the special sanctioning procedures. So this is why in 2023, this number of specialized sanctioning processes skyrocketed because then there was more activity in political terms, exposure-wise. So there were complaints among political parties saying that those acts that they did within those processes had as an end purpose to position people in an anticipated manner. So what did Claudia say? That this was one of the main situations, as Councilor Claudia said, the anticipated actions of campaigns. So it involved a series of topics such as slander, etc., etc. So I think this is one of the different elements, different from previous electoral processes that we have experienced in Mexico. I do believe that also in terms of parity, there are several aspects that are interesting and important to go back to. For example, I would say that since the president of the National Institute was elected, the tribunal intervened, ordering Congress that the 5-number list through which the presidency was elected was exclusive for women. This in order to adhere to an alternance type of law, because the previous one was a man. So in terms of parity, talking about one-person positions, in many cases they have also been alternating gender. So if there was a previous male as a president, now it was time for a woman. And the way to guarantee that a woman was to be appointed is that all of the candidates to that position were women. So this way they guaranteed that Congress, the House of Representatives, elected a woman for the presidency of the National Electoral Institute. Also in the presidency, but this in the candidacy for the president, I think in this process we don't have that problem. We have 3 candidates, 2 of them are women and 1 is a man, but through a sentence by the higher chamber, it was ordered that for the next electoral process for the president, to have also gender alternate in political parties. What does this mean? That the political party that today postulated a man, in the next process would have to postulate a woman. And in the case of political parties that are postulating a woman, now they would have the option to postulate a woman or a man. Because the principle of alternance, which is an affirmative action in order to guarantee the participation of women, cannot be applied in prejudice of women, of course. So this is the logic of this principle of parity understood from alternance.
Another very important criteria that I think that we have taken from the federal electoral process of year 2021 was to guarantee that the spots or women propaganda, the propaganda of political parties, will be guaranteeing to put the women in reflectors, to shed light on them, to promote the women nominees. Because if we say the candidates of a political party, it may be understood that they are only promoting men and not women. Even in year 2021, political parties that did not comply with the obligation that they had at that time, that was City 40, at least have 40% of the propaganda aiming women, was considered invisibility of women and therefore gender-based women violence. So now the parity has changed. It's 50-50. This is very important topics. I think that we have made great progress in Mexico to that regard, but there's still some pending issues in order to guarantee parity on electoral women's electoral participation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Secretary Santana, for your kind words. And now we will be starting our Q&A session. The first question, I remind you because I think that in previous sessions they have been reminded you that we are right now in election silence period. After the election day, can we apply nullity clauses, and which ones would they be after election day? The procedure is still in place. It is permanent. Take into account that one of the matters is gender-based political violence against women. And that is a permanent issue. And the rules for airtime in TV and radio broadcasting, according to the airtime assigned by the INE, those are things that are permanent. And the procedure to sanction them will always be there. Right now, we are focusing on campaign rules, alleged violations of public servants, actions, the use of children during campaigns. But yes, that sanctioning unit is always there. It's permanent. The sanctioning procedure. In case of nullity, I think that this question, nullity, when you have null of candidates and not of ballot boxes, I think that that can have a consequence, a recomposition in the tally, just correct the final results of the ballots. And this is not to be neglected, because to annulate a polling station or a ballot box can change the winner. So if that polling station, the political party obtained a great number of votes compared to the second place, and that difference in that polling station is higher to the difference of the entire election between the first and the second place, it can affect the winner. In case of election annulment, yes, we have a system in place in the general law in a challenging act. The challenging act specifies the acts of nullity, like the non-installation of a certain portion of polling stations on the election day, or annul a percentage of polling stations installed. I think that is 20%. And I think that in presidential election, it changes to 25. And then we have a generic one that is open. We can say nullity when there are violations that cannot be repaired during election day and that are consequential for the outcome. That says that no irregularities that are committed interfere with the result. There can be interferences, but that do not affect the outcome of the election. We have to count the votes as where the votes are being challenged are higher than the difference between the first and second place, then that could lead to annulment. In the case, the other concept to determine if nullity applies or not, because there we have more subjective concepts, we would say on quality basis. On numbers, it will be quantity, and quality is measure the impact of the irregularity. That will be a qualitative one. That you have a margin of discretion of the person that will be judging to appreciate if that irregularity can lead to annulment or not. Anticipated actions of pre-campaign, because in an anticipated way started to be having an act before 10 individuals, let's say. Maybe you can say that that act will not be influencing an election that you would win with 1,000. There are things that we cannot determine the impact that they might have, like being present in TV or radio broadcasting, because we cannot determine the number of people that have viewed or heard that message. So we have actions that can really impact the outcome of the election, and then, yes, it will be void. And then we have a specific cause when a party or a candidate goes over the authorized expenditure threshold. Whenever you have 5% over the amount authorized, that could be really important to lead to election annulment. And this should be analyzed case per case. When the difference between the first and the second place is lower than 5. And that is subjective. The difference could be 4.99% of the votes. That could be thousands of votes. And maybe they can credit it a surplus of expenditure of 5%. But at the end of the day, there is where the discretionality will be into play. The unlawful acquisition of media airtime not only buying, because not only buying airtime on radio and TV, broadcasting is forbidden, and nobody will dare to sign a contract to buy airtime because that will be a clear violation to the law. So oftentimes the acquisition is being simulated, or a counter agreement that is done. But if you find out that there is a agreement behind the scenes to have airtime for that person, that is an illegal acquisition of airtime. Then we have to measure that irregularity, appraise it vis-a-vis the outcome to see if the election can or not be annulled. Then we have the involvement of public servants that are participating in promoting the candidates. So this will be the causes of nullity that we would have in the Mexican electoral system. The next question: what are the most common facts that go in this consideration of gender-based political violence? What we have learned of those facts can be the use of stereotypes during communication or politics that qualify women, or they link them to sentimental relationships. We had a case that was quite interesting because a political woman came to us telling us, and today she is a candidate, that yes, she has a relationship with a politician. Her husband is a politician. When they referred to her career, they always say that she had a political career because her husband had a political career. So they kind of made her invisible as a candidate. And with her political career, was tagged as being the political career because of his husband. So yes, those are very clear stereotypes in the political communications that we are seeing. Oftentimes, those are facts that have to do with the women's body. Normally, women that are politicians, and there's a diversity of acts. But maybe what we have seen the most is that with symbolic violence presence is there. Patriarchal images are always there, that they will be the puppets of, that they will be manipulated by. Oftentimes that are the claims that we receive. What is set forth in the law as gender-based political violence? Well, that is what was already known by electoral authorities. They prevent them from exercising their position. Sometimes they will withdraw their wages, or they withdraw support staff for them once that they are in office. And then threats, direct threats or threats to their close ones. That could be their working staff or their family members. So unfortunately, yes, we do have those kind of cases that have been brought to us. And digital violence on the social media, that's what we have been highlighting. There are two cases that we should be analyzing very closely, because under these assumptions, it has to do with journalists, women journalists, when they refer to women. One of them is a candidate, and they are referring to a sentimental relationship. But this is done by a journalist, a woman journalist, and this is of public outreach. And then the other one that is a concession of a businessman here in Mexico, and he has a TV chain or broadcast communication station. And then he comes and say that in 2 years is a series of expressions caused and discriminatory have been made. This case is very important because when we carry out this test that is being carried out by the higher chamber, what they are analyzing is that, yes, indeed, there is a very strong language. However, is how that has been affecting the political electoral rights. Those are cases that have to be examined very closely, and that we have to be attentive to those kind of cases because those are actions that are violence against women. Well, since we are short of time, this will be the last questions addressed to you. With all the guarantees of due process and protection, are there any kind of difference between one type of procedure and another one? Due process is applied and enforced in all procedural actions. The special sanctioning process should be very agile, but since we have to have the due process in place when notifying all procedural acts from the 4 procedures, they apply to the same due process laws on the legal terms and times. That is, and the tribunal is very careful to that regard. And a topic that we must review here in Mexico is the prescription of conducts and deadlines. It is not very clear regarding the times. It is a tribunal that decides the times where the sanctioning procedure may apply according to the time and establish the responsibility. The truth of the matter is that we should explore very carefully how we are doing this procedure or process, notably in cases when we are singling out the person responsible for that. All of these billboards appear all of a sudden, and we saw them all around, and it was denounced. But we did not find who had installed all those billboards, not even the person that rented that billboard. So those are topics that take time investigating, and that is why the decision of that procedure will take a longer period of time to make. So the rules of due process are being followed strictly. Well, I will be coming back to BPG or gender-based political violence. Just to make a clarification, gender-based political violence in Mexico is not exclusive for electoral purposes. The law establishes that there is a criminal, an administrative, and an electoral grounds. Depending in which sphere these faults are committed or alleged faults are committed, it will be an authority that will be intervening. In electoral matters, its competence is limited to protect the political electoral rights of women only. On the competencies level, the competence of electoral tribunal is to guarantee electoral political rights of women to exercise their right free of political violence. So, for us to learn from a complaint who is the victim, that person has to be a right holder of political and election rights. The faults have to be committed during her execution of those activities, and that gives us our competence to intervene and then transfer that case either to the local authorities or to the electoral tribunal to which it may correspond. And then, in both procedure, ordinary and special procedures, we guarantee fully of all stages. There is indictment, there is proof, admission, how to create the allegations, and the difference is that the ordinary procedures, as per its nature, doesn't run very fast unlike the special sanctioning processes that must be much more agile. We have to respond in 7 days according to the law for those cases, because we need to understand the complexity just to indict the persons, to send him a notice, because you have to have the right address or domicile. If there are other authorities, you need them to respond, and so. But the procedure stages are guaranteeing that will be auditing, removal of council positions, among others. We want to thank both of our speakers, and we want to thank you all for your attendance. We have concluded for today, and we hope that you can join us tomorrow, starting with a message of the Mexico City electoral authorities. Thank you, and see you tomorrow. Have a nice evening.